It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story Podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hello and welcome to this episode of Her Success Story. I am Ivy Slater, and we are focusing on a series that talks about the impact of women on boards. Today, I have a really great guest, a woman who I was connected to in the last few months and have had the pleasure to have some wonderful conversations with that we realized like we have to do this interview. Barbara Piette is Knightsbridge Advisers Managing Principal. She joined Knightsbridge after spending more than 20 years as a venture capitalist, holding partner positions with both Charles River Ventures and Schroder Ventures. She has been a leader in the industry of venture capital. She's been a leader and has an enormous amount of great insight about women on board. So Barbara, thank you for joining me here today.
Ivy, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So what drove you to start getting involved with women on boards or seeing this or having opinions on it?
Well, so I started taking board seats pretty early in my career. As a venture capitalist, I ultimately served on 16 corporate boards. They spanned industries including healthcare services, IT, including such subsectors as MarTech and wearables, in biopharma and in retail. And I also currently serve on 2 not-for-profits. So the drivers for the corporate boards and the not-for-profits were very different. So starting with the corporate boards, as a general partner in the 2 venture firms that you mentioned, first at Charles River, I did tech investing in companies like Abacus Direct, which was later sold to DoubleClick, and in healthcare services companies, investing in companies like Community Health Systems. And I then co-founded SC Life Sciences, which was one of the first cross-Atlantic and industry-specific venture firms. And there I was honored to invest in and serve on the boards of some life-changing companies, such as Geltex Pharmaceuticals, which was founded by the prolific Harvard innovator George Whitesides, a world-class chemist. So I was on behalf of those investments that I took board seats and served on these boards to help the companies grow and achieve their full potential. Even as a representing an investor of a company, as a board member, you still have multiple constituencies. So it was always important to keep that in mind. As an aside, probably the most fun board seat that I ever sat on was that of FAO Schwarz. I haven't sat next to it. Yeah, it was awesome. Great team, new team that took over this old line retail company, which of course is iconic. But I haven't sat next to a giant stuffed panda bear at a board table since.
Oh, that touches my heart. FAO Schwarz is always so held as a New Yorker a near and dear place to my heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a dear friend who was raised in Manhattan, and he says that his mom used to take him to FAO Schwarz and tell him he was in a museum that they could look but not buy.
I love it. So, so you've participated on boards, and have you often been the only woman? Are there several? What are you seeing? What I love about you coming on today is we've talked a lot about concepts and the importance, and but you're sharing with us today the perspective of you have been and are today on various boards.
Yeah, and just to step back a little bit. So when I changed careers to the fund of funds industry, so I'm currently a managing principal at Knightsbridge Advisers, which is a venture capital fund of funds. So I went from being a VC to now investing in venture firms. In that role, because we're SEC regulated, I wasn't able to take outside board roles anymore because we're investing in firms, no longer in companies.
That makes sense.
But I do currently serve as an advisor to about 9 different firms. Five of them are early stage venture firms, and then a handful of early stage tech companies. But I do also serve on two not-for-profit boards. The one I'm probably most involved in is the Concussion Legacy Foundation. And our mission is to make sports safer and to really shine the light on concussion and post-concussion syndrome, both epidemics in this country and silent epidemics that aren't talked about. So you talked earlier about the drivers. So the driver for the corporate boards I've explained. I think the reason people get involved in not-for-profit boards is personal strong interest or personal passion.
That is very true. You know, on a side note, listeners, if you have a strong interest in learning more about non-for-profits, Her Success Stories has about 6 interviews in our archive with leaders in the nonprofit arena that we did during the holidays in 2018. So you might want to check that out. I think it's so important to understand. First of all, I have, you know, side note, when do you sleep? That's a lot of it.
I have a lot of energy. You know, I think I love variety in my life. And one of the wonderful things about the complexities of serving right now in so many different advisory roles is that I see different problems, different growth strategies, different opportunities. And the variety is both personally scintillating, but it also, you know, informs the other things that I'm involved in. So lessons learned from one entity can really help and inform another entity that one is involved in, which I don't mean to create my own segue here, but it's another reason diversity is important, right? Because I think that different lenses and different perspectives in one arena can really help another.
I think that's really important to understand and embrace. I respect you 100% for it, and it makes perfect sense. The learning across the board, and then the various perspectives you get to see and to take forward and to bring different insight to the different things you're involved in. And all of us out there, as we get involved in various things, it gives us a motivation and a purpose of we're gaining insight from everything we're involved in. And when we could bring that forward to other dimensions is incredibly impactful. So tell me, do you see a difference when there are one versus more women on boards? Do you see a difference in industries, you know, from the nonprofits to profits to tech? I'm very curious.
Yeah, so there's a lot of research on this, but let me start with my, I guess, anecdotal experience. So with one notable exception, I was typically on all the corporate boards on which I served, I was the only woman. And I frankly didn't think a lot about it at the time because that's simply the way it was. And you know, perhaps later in our discussion, Ivy, we could talk more about board communication and how and why women may be perceived differently. But to answer your question about numbers of women, I think that this isn't my quip. I heard it somewhere, but you know, if you're one woman on a board, and I experienced this. I was on you know, the retail company FAO Schwartz. I was on a bunch of healthcare services companies, and I would often get turned to ask, so how would women think about this issue? Well, you know, I like to think that I'm reasonably intelligent, but I can't speak for 50% of the world population. And if there's 2 women on a board, you know, the 2 of us would get asked the same question. Once there's 3 women on a board, suddenly you become people. You just become other smart people who are equal contributors. So I think it's this notion of let's get a token woman on the board and that will kind of shut up shareholders isn't really where we want to go. Where we want to go is to have enough women on boards that we're no longer trying to represent half the population.
Right, because I love how you put that, and it's so true. How can you speak for 50 of the population? How could one woman representative in a variety of places speak for 50% of our population? And which is a strong push for diversity overall.
No, absolutely. The other thing is, there's more and more research that's been done. So research shows that companies with board representation by women simply tend to grow faster and more profitably. They have higher return on investment, higher return on equity, higher cash flow on investment. The list goes on. And I'd refer your listeners to a study sponsored by catalyst.org. It's a great website. It's a great organization. And their research suggests, those performance numbers, which I just mentioned, but some other softer things that diversity and inclusion promote. Those kinds of companies are more successful at retaining talent. They're more likely to have teams with knowledge sharing and with higher job satisfaction. They're more likely to be innovative and earn a premium for that innovation. Those companies earn 38% more of their revenues on average from innovative products and services. And those are some staggering data points. And then there was a separate McKinsey study of, they looked at 1,000 companies in 12 countries, and they found that organizations in the top 25% when it comes to gender diversity among executive teams were more likely to outperform on profitability and value creation. So the stats are out there, and they're overwhelming.
And now to start following through on the implementation.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. And the implementation isn't trivial, because once you have a board that is represented by people who all look alike and come from similar backgrounds, it's much harder to add someone different to that board than if you're starting out and creating something new, right? So I think that we need to focus on two areas. We need to change some of the existing boards out there and slowly but surely get women represented. But when you're starting a new organization, and I say this to the entrepreneurs that I work with and to the venture teams that are backing a lot of these organizations, think about creating a diverse culture from day one. It's a lot easier to create a culture when, your second employee is a woman or your third employee is a woman than, trying to add that lone software engineer to a group of 30 guys.
I love that. And especially in the venture capital world with new startups in the tech community, et cetera, it is a great opportunity to start with diversity and inclusion from the early stages. And based on the statistics, the success of that company will be on even a better trajectory.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. The problem that venture is what I know best, right? Because that's what I've done most of my career. But so let me provide one last batch of statistics, which is a little less heartening, and that is these stats are from the National Venture Capital Association. And they did a study in conjunction with Deloitte on the venture industry itself. So 45% of the venture capital workforce is women, but only 15% of the investment professionals in VC are women. Now, VCs invest. That is their investment firms. So if only 15% of the investment professionals are women, that's a staggeringly low number. Of them, only 11% of the partners are women, right? So VCs are happy to hire women, but it's when you start getting up to where you're sharing power that things start changing. But I've seen a huge sea change, and I've seen a huge.
Tell me what you're seeing, because I'd love to. Number one, I'd love to be encouraged, on a personal level, listeners. I would love to see that, we're going in a direction, but also what's going on out there in the world.
Well, it's interesting. I'll tell you an anecdotal story. So, and I'm sure the NVCA has some great numbers to back up. But roughly 4 years ago, I started getting phone calls from some of the general partners in the venture firms in which we invest. And some of the conversations went like this, gee, we want to invest in more women entrepreneurs. We're not getting our fair share of women entrepreneurs. Will you come brainstorm with us? Or, gee, we want to hire an associate who's a woman, and the resumes we're getting from, you name the business school, are 25-1 men to women. How can we attract more women to apply? So, and I went to do the brainstorming, and to their credit, they did a lot of thinking about this. But, you'd start with their website, and after scrolling through 30 guys, you'd come to the sole woman in the firm who wasn't an investment professional, right? And some of these firms had invested in women entrepreneurs. I said, feature them, They had entrepreneurs in residence who were all male. Go find a terrific woman entrepreneur in residence and make sure she's on your website. And there's a lot of ways to show that you're open and you're truly interested in this. But what's interesting, Ivy, is that the change isn't going to happen because we somehow convince men to play nice. The change is coming, and it's inevitable because it's simply good business sense. Women are starting businesses. You no longer have to be, 20 years in, a prestigious IT firm now to spin off and start a company. You can start a company with low capitalization because you can buy computation in the cloud. I mean, you just get on Amazon Web Services, and you can start companies for just fractions of the cost, which levels the playing field. So now women don't need these pedigrees which they can't get because they were hitting glass ceilings. They can go start companies, and VCs are recognizing that, and they want in on those companies. Some of the stats that I talked to you about earlier just are pretty compelling that it's simply good business sense. That's what's going to change things.
And we've been fortunate to have several interviews in the series. If you're just tuning in, you probably want to listen to the whole series on various perspectives of what all the stats are, the impact on investing on a Fortune 500 level to where Barbara's sharing with us today on a venture capital level. So tell us, change is coming, which is great. Change is, I'll always say change is good. It can be scary for many, and it is a wonderful thing. How can our listeners, how can the working woman and the working men who tune in start saying, I can do what to help? When I hear this, I can do that.
So I think there are lots of things we can do. I think that talks like you and I are having right now are great. I think that talks like we're having now need to reach more men, not just women, because women get it. I mean, we know we're fabulous, right? We need to create awareness and to educate by passing along some of the research I mentioned earlier to men who are currently making decisions. I mean, let's face it right now, the majority of Fortune 500 companies are still run by men. Most boards are still overwhelmingly populated by men. I've spoken on or attended various panels on getting women on boards, for example, and the room is filled to the brim with women. That's not how change is going to happen. Those rooms need to be filled with men who will learn something and who, nominate a woman for the board. The issue isn't supply. I'm on the board of another not-for-profit for the advancement of diversity in life sciences. We've placed 16 amazing women on life sciences company boards. The problem that we faced was not supply. We have a database of hundreds and hundreds of C-suite experienced women. The problem is demand. It's convincing CEOs that they want to take a chance maybe on a woman who hasn't been on a board before, or maybe a woman who hasn't been on a public company board before. The problem is not supply. I think,
and I'm going to jump in here for one second, because there's talk out there, and I'm not the most educated on boards, which is one, the series was very self-serving for me, okay, because I wanted to learn more. And as I did my research and education, there's comments that have come up and pieces in research, etc., of, do we have enough qualified women candidates? Do we have, is there enough? And I'm thrilled to hear you say there are an overwhelmingly supply of female candidates for board members, women with strong backgrounds in business and C-suite who are ready.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's way too much emphasis placed on, let's run workshops and charge women to learn how to be good board members. You don't see men going to those.
Right.
I mean, for some specialized industries, you need some special expertise. Like getting on a mutual fund board, for example, there are sort of important nuances, but generally it's good business judgment. It's understanding multiple constituencies. It's understanding what you owe to shareholders and what you owe to the management teams, et cetera. It's good business judgment. And so, I mean, there's a woman in New York who's out of one of the big investment banks, and she's changed her life to run a recruiting firm, an executive search firm, rather, for getting women into C-suite positions. And the first thing she will tell you is that it's not a supply problem. She too has thousands and thousands and thousands of qualified women. It's a demand. It's a demand problem. And I think one of the other things we can do, Ivy, is to support some of the really active and dynamic organizations that already exist out there that are creating some awareness. And some of those include Elevate. That's where you and I met, right? And that's Elevate with 2 L's. There's Catalyst.org, which is another organization in New York that's terrific. And they have a lot of statistics on their website if you want more statistics. The National Venture Capital Association has stepped up. They've got an active diversity program. There are things like the International Women's Forum and all its local chapters. I'm a member of the Massachusetts Women's Forum. And there are many, many more, but, find one that you like, get involved, add your voice to it. And it's a way to amplify all our voices.
So you don't have to conquer the world in one day. You can actually just take one step forward. And if all the women out there, we take a step forward, there's power in numbers, ladies.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, another interesting point is that if I entertained myself once by just scrolling around Fortune 500 company boards online and just kind of looking. And so this isn't real research and it's sort of anecdotal, but I observed that there were the same women on multiple Fortune 500 boards. Now, this suggested 2 things to me. It suggested, number one, that those women must have been darn good because they were getting referred effectively to other boards. So they proved their worth. But it also suggested that the board members of some of these companies just aren't looking far enough. They're not looking at the supply of these thousands and thousands of other women. They're kind of talking to other guys they know and getting referred the one woman that they know that served on another board, right? So we just have to, let's just try a little harder. Let's just look outside the box. Let's task recruiters, not with just putting a round peg in a round hole as fast as they can, but to really provide a list of capable women as potential candidates for these available seats.
I love it. I love the, first of all, I have to say, Barbara, that you and I, also sit and, just scroll through crazy things. It's a curiosity. What's going on in the world? And listeners, I encourage you, Barbara's not putting this as a tip, but this is a tip. When you are curious, just scroll around, look at what's going on. you know, in various, if it's Fortune 500 companies, if you're interested in venture capitals, if you define your area of interest and you take a look for yourself, and then you have the ability to step up because you have insight and information.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you know, it's not just a matter of and thinking about the next generation, right? And the next generation of entrepreneurs, the next generation of talented managers. It's not about us helping other women solely. It's about us helping men understand that their teams are going to be better for adding women, that their businesses are going to grow faster for having a range of diversity. So let's make sure that we're telling the story broadly.
So true. Barbara, how can people follow you, learn more about, and be in touch if they're curious?
So I'm certainly on LinkedIn, and people are welcome to just message me on LinkedIn. I check in on a regular basis, and happy to hear from people.
Wonderful. Any last tips for our listeners today?
You know, this is maybe a little bit of a non sequitur, but it's important to me. I think women need to think about two things. One is the communicating, and if I look back on my career, I wish Amy Cuddy had done her research before I took my first board seat ever. If you don't, do you know who Amy Cuddy is?
Yes. You just brought a huge smile to my face.
She's great. So my poor daughter, when she was 11, I had her watching Amy Cuddy videos. And then I realized, you know what, I should have my son watching the Amy Cuddy videos too. But Amy Cuddy talks about effective communication, right? And I think that, and I'm the last person in the world to, like, quote unquote, blame women for anything. So I think, you know, women need to be recognized, period. But, you know, there's some things we can do. We can exude more confidence. We can end our sentences by not going up at the end so we sound like we're questioning. There's a lot of effective postures and communication styles that are important to think about. That's number one. Number two, I would urge women to find a mentor. And one of the things I told you in my story about the general partners in these venture firms, one of the things that one of the pieces of unsolicited advice I offered them is, once you hire a woman, who's going to mentor her? Research suggests that highly successful people often can point to an important mentor in their careers. People, as a gross generalization, tend to mentor people who remind them of who they were when they were young. And that young woman that the 50-year-old guy just hired, is not going to remind you of who you were when you were her age. So you need to consciously find ways to mentor. And also women, look for mentors. You can't do it on your own. Nobody can. So establish these effective relationships, learn from other people, and make, you know, this mentorship includes more than the occasional, let me tell you how things go in the office. But, you know, you need to invite, I'm speaking out of men, invite those new women that you just hired to the baseball games, or to, you know, whatever the thing is that your culture does, and make sure that they're included, and make sure that you're speaking to them in the same way as you would a new hire who's male. And women purposefully, thoughtfully find good mentors.
I love it. Mentorship is so important in all leadership. And it on a personal basis, when women come to me, young women come to me, it brings me great joy. So it's not just the great tip. It truly, I'll tell you on the other perspective, listeners, when you go to somebody and say, well, you know, I'd love to, you know, kind of align with you and possibly you mentor me and stuff, it is the biggest compliment, and the work and the connection brings both parties incredible joy and knowledge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Barbara, thank you so much for taking time out of, I know it's always a busy day for you.
Well, it was really fun, Ivy, and thank you for doing this. This is such an important topic, and you're, adding your voice to this and amplifying this message through your terrific audience really, will make a huge difference, and we'll keep taking these steps. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And listeners, feel free, subscribe to Her Success Story. It will be in your inbox every Monday morning with new episodes filled with fabulous guests and occasional content for you to take forward into your worlds. Let us know what you like, what you want to hear. Reach out to Barbara. You feel free to leave a comment for her on Her Success Story as well. And thank you for joining us today. Till next time.